Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bensavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. You guys, today's show is very important and near and dear to my heart because it has to do with my hometown here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and labor rights, which I think all of you know are important and something we need to stay on top of. So, after more than 1,100 days on strike, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette workers had returned to the newsroom last November to cheers, applause, and hopes that one of the longest newspaper strikes in America was finally coming to an end. And maybe things were, dare I say, going to get better. But just mere months later, the future of the paper and the journalists who went on strike to save it faced a more uncertain future. Unfortunately, the Block family that owns the paper, they decided to sell the paper. They decided to close the paper following the labor dispute that originated due to healthcare costs. And at the 11th hour, the Venetulis Institute, a nonprofit, decided to save, quote unquote, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and has taken ownership as of this month, the month of May. So following that sale, roughly 80% of the union journalists who were on strike have now reportedly been laid off. Now, this is, of course, raising major concerns about whether the people who spent literal years fighting and sacrificing for labor protections and local journalism are being pushed out altogether. Tonight, we are going to be digging into what happened behind the scenes at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, what this means for the union labor and for independent journalism in both Pittsburgh and really beyond, and whether local news can survive when the people producing it treat it as disposable. Joining me is Andrew Goldstein, president of the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here, Natalie. Thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear, too, I was supposed to have Erin Hebert on, and she was unable to make today's interview. So I appreciate you jumping in last minute and sharing thoughts about what's going on. Andrew, before we get into some of the more, let's say, step-by-step questions that a lot of us probably have here, just talk a little bit about how it had felt when the strike was just over and everybody was feeling maybe a collective sigh of relief for a moment.
Sure. Well, you talked about it in your opening there, Natalie. When we went back to work after more than 3 years on the picket line, we went back to a huge community celebration, and there was a lot of fanfare, a lot of applause. There was plenty of coverage from that day. It was really a glorious day. I mean, I know that myself and my coworkers felt very empowered by the support and love that we had felt from the community, not just that day, but throughout the entire strike.
Yeah.
And so going back to work after such a long time was, anxious but exciting. We all That's what we had been working for, all of us, those 3 years to get to that day where we could walk back into that newsroom with our heads held high, and that's what we did. And for, a few weeks, a month and a half or so, things felt like they were maybe getting, a little bit better. It was very weird, obviously, the first few weeks, but, little by little, you kinda settled into a routine.
Mhm.
And then, just a week or so after New Year's, the blocks announced they were closing the paper, and really, it's just been kind of, one issue to the next, uh, since that happened in mid-January. So, it started out pretty well, but uh, such is life at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It got rather challenging rather quickly.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think a lot of us, I mean, full disclosure, I used to work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and having known the Block family pretty well, it wasn't surprising because they've always struck me as petty and spiteful. And so it really did feel very retaliatory when they decided to just shut down the paper. And I was very much of the mind that the paper was going to shut down and Pittsburgh was not going to have a daily. And so when I saw Venetulis Institute come in and it appeared to have saved the day, I was curious about them and the work that they've done. They also own the Baltimore Banner, which is a reputable institution in and of itself. So I thought, okay. But then looking a little bit further into it, I was wondering, are they going to be hostile towards the union? And unfortunately, that is what we're seeing. So when did union leadership start to realize that large scale layoffs were becoming a possibility?
Sure. Well, we understood that no matter who the block sold the Post-Gazette to, if they sold it at all, there was a good possibility that there would be some staff cuts.
Hmm.
So the idea that there might be some was not a foreign concept. I just want to reiterate that from the get-go, and one of the first things that we told Post-Gazette management upon our return, in fact, it was the first thing we told them the very first day we were back, was that we want everyone who has a job here currently to keep their job. We wanted a robust, strong newsroom to serve the Pittsburgh region. That's what we felt
Hmm.
was necessary. And so, of course, we understand the realities of the news industry right now. It's a very challenging time.
Hmm.
However, when we heard about Ventulis taking over, again, at first, we were cautiously optimistic, but probably, within a few days, not even, we were hearing rumors coming from some friends we have over at the Baltimore Banner that there could be pretty significant cuts coming to the tune of, maybe half the newsroom.
Wow.
So there was a lot of uh, celebration around the sale. I also think that at the same time, we realized that we were dealing with, a situation that was going to be, um, potentially very traumatic for a lot of people here. And so, that's why we made a lot of the public statements that we did over the past few weeks saying that, hey, Ventulis, you know, let's work to keep as many jobs as we possibly can here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And just to really hit that point home, everyone had to reapply for their job. And I had talked to some of the journalists, not on camera, but we had discussed what that process was like. And it seemed like everyone sort of had a different take on it. Some people felt like they had a pretty robust interview, and other people's were telling me that it felt very hurried and rushed. What was the consensus from your experience about how those interviews were conducted for people who were basically reapplying for their jobs under this new ownership?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of strange because I wouldn't exactly even call these interviews job interviews.
That's what
Uh,
people were telling me. Yeah.
yeah, it was like, we had basically 20-minute sessions
Mhm.
where, you met a Ventulis executive. In some cases, they didn't know who you were, what you did. They didn't have your resume in front of you, um, or in front of them. Sorry.
Mhm.
So, we had conversations, and I think largely they were cordial and, in some cases, maybe even somewhat productive and positive. Um, but it wasn't like a job interview, I
Mhm.
mean, they didn't really ask about, you know, at least in my personal experience, what kind of reporting I did or wanted to do or, really anything other than, you know, what do you what can you tell us about Pittsburgh, and what do you think the Post-Gazette needs to do moving forward? It was more that kind of conversation rather than specific, questions about jobs and skills and, um, things like that. So it was kind of weird. I like I said, I hesitate to call them job interviews because they really weren't. I don't know, uh, if it was just something that they had to do to go through the motions, but,
Mhm.
uh,
Mm.
it really seemed like they didn't put a whole lot of thought behind those conversations.
If you're just joining us, I'm Natalie Bencavanga. I'm chatting with Andrew Goldstein, the president of the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh. We're talking about the massive layoffs that have recently happened at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette under new ownership with the Venezuela's Institute, and how 80% of the union journalists who participated in the strike have reportedly been laid off. Let's talk about that percentage, because that in and of itself is very concerning. Do you think those layoffs, and of course we're speculating here, this isn't a statement of fact, but do you think they were financially motivated, or do you think it was retaliatory, or that they just are not a union friendly organization and wanted to create that line in the sand? What were your thoughts? Because I was shocked at how brazen of a decision that was out the gate, especially when you're trying to build trust and establish yourselves in a union town, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I mean, I think it was a lot of mixed messaging
Yeah,
because in the week or 2 prior to, us finding out who had jobs and who didn't, they had told us that they were going to recognize the union. I had
right.
been in touch with, um, attorneys representing Ventulis. So, again, we understood that the situation was, there was gonna be, a likelihood that not everyone was gonna keep their jobs, and that we understood also, unfortunately, some of our strikers probably were not going to, uh, have jobs, and we understood that. But I think those numbers that you pointed out rightly are just highlight the situation where we had 80% of the people who were on strike not be retained, and overall, the newsroom had 40% cuts. So, if you're looking at just that like ratio, I mean, it's you know uh, basically 2 to 1 of strikers being cut to, people who crossed our picket line.
Yeah.
And really, the ratio of people who were hired was actually much higher than that. So can I call it retaliatory? It's hard to say that because we weren't on strike against
Sure.
Ventulis. But what I can say is, knowing that Ventulis kept uh, the entire Post-Gazette management structure in place from the president and executive editor on down, I know, or I can at least assume, who was making the suggestions on who to hire to Ventulis. And so to me, regardless of whether it was intentional or not, uh, it became very clear very quickly to us that there was discrimination against the people who had been active during the strike. I think another important note is that 6 or 7 union officers at the Post Gazette lost their jobs, including, myself as the president, the vice president, our local secretary, and a number of other officers, including a number of people who had been on the staff and been a part of the Pulitzer Prize that we won for the Tree of Life coverage back in 2018. So, um, yeah, I'll leave the description up to uh, you know uh, uh, what the public thinks, but I think the numbers are very clear as to who was hired and who wasn't, and we have a pretty strong argument that this was pretty clearly and blatant discriminatory effort.
How has the morale then been among the remaining union members and journalists who spent years on the picket line only to find themselves out of work? And have you talked to the people who are left that were in the union? What have they been saying? I was shocked to see who had been laid off, and I'm so sorry to hear about you being a part of that as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that, but again, my concern is for really everyone else. I think for those of us who were laid off, it's been a miserable week. I mean, we have had really going back to 2022, um, bad week compiled on bad week. I think this one might take the cake, though. Honestly, I mean, we've been through a lot of struggles. We've had some really great, moments. Um, but, it's been surrounded by just struggle, and difficulty. So, yeah, I mean, the people who lost their jobs in many cases, um, are really suffering. They don't know exactly what they're going to do. We're trying to do the best we can, of course, to help everyone. We always stick together, and we're always going to try to make sure that people are being taken care of the best we can, as much as we can really do. At the same time, the journalists who were on strike, who were hired by the Post Gazette, are put in, uh, kind of an awkward situation. Um, and I've spoken with them as well, and I'm sure to some extent they're grateful to have jobs. At the same time, they're now dealing with a situation where, they're surrounded by, some management that's clearly acting discriminatory,
Mhm.
by a lot of coworkers who crossed our picket line. And so, they're going to do the best they can. I'm sure they'll be professional, but it puts them in a really awkward situation where, they want to continue to do a quality job, um, but at the same time, they are going to have to, um, make sure that they're taking care of each other, watching each other's backs, and you know, uh, trying to do what they can to keep the guild going as much as is possible at this juncture.
When we look at the history of this situation and this strike at the Post Gazette being one of the longest strikes in the US's history, do you feel like it accomplished what it set out to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are the rare case of a very long strike uh, that ends up winning everything that we had asked for, and which, quite frankly, was pretty straightforward stuff. Give us our old contract back, give us our old health care back, and bargain a successor agreement. And, unfortunately, the blocks didn't want to do that, but we got to the point with the courts where they were forced into that position. Um, is that kind of a fruitless victory? Is it worth it? I mean, I sure do. I think that we had no other choice.
Right.
I don't know what the Post Gazette would look like right now if we hadn't done that. I mean, it's possible that it could be an even worse situation where not only are people not only are there massive staff cuts, but also people are not making as much. People don't have certain protections, certain benefits. Um, I think the dust is still settling on a lot of these issues. However, absolutely, I think that we accomplished what we set out to accomplish through a lot of sacrifice, and we are now facing this new battle, and I see this really as the start of a new battle. I don't see this as the result of the strike. I just see this as kind of the next big fight that we're going to have here.
What does that actually look like, Andrew, in terms of what are your options now? I mean, I've been very curious about this whole situation from just like the legal perspective of did they basically dismantle the union because there's so few of you left? Like, what does it mean? And then what can the newspaper guild do about it?
Hmm. Well, that's a good question, and I think that we're still exploring a lot of our options. I mean, I know that we are still the bargaining representative of the newsroom of the Post-Gazette. That
Mhm.
includes the strikers who did return, who were members in good standing. That also includes the people who were in the bargaining unit who crossed our picket line. We are still uh, in charge of bargaining a new contract for that entire staff.
Mhm.
And that's our intention. I think that we're going to work very hard to make sure that we uh, are able to get to a point where we can get a solid contract in place at the Post Gazette that is very beneficial to everyone there. Um, and, it's just going to be, really a long term process of rebuilding. I think that we've proven that, we are willing to fight those long battles. And, while this is definitely a low point, I still think that, we've proven that we're hard to get rid of. You can't kill us off all that easily. And so, the people who are there now are still under our charge, and we take that very seriously. So there's a there's there's a lot of questions.
Yeah,
Admittedly so. I don't know exactly what the future is going to hold. I don't know what things might look like 6 months from now or a year from now.
sure.
But I know that I'm not giving up. I know that we have really good people, both at the PG and who just got laid off, who are going to continue fighting. Um, and we'll see what that looks like down the road.
We have a problem, I think, in this nation that we're not fully addressing, and I think the situation at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette really highlights it, which is the taking over of our newspaper industry by the billionaire class. The Block family was uber wealthy, and now the man behind the Venezuela Institute, he's also a billionaire, Stuart Bainum Jr. What do you want people to understand about what happens when this is where the industry goes, and when you have one family or one individual, even if it's behind a nonprofit, when they still at the end of the day have a lot of say and understanding around how they want things to be shaped? I mean, we're seeing what's happened at the Washington Post and other spaces with billionaire ownership. What concerns you about that?
Well, what's concerning about that is that people who have that kind of money typically don't really want good journalism. I mean,
Right.
people who get that kind of money, don't like people snooping around and, pulling documents and looking at business information. And, it doesn't suit that class of people to have quality journalism um, because they don't like people asking questions.
Hmm.
So, to that point, um, what we've decided to do, some of us who have been laid off, is to start trying to form our own news organization. As you know, we've formed with community members what we're calling PAPER, or the Pittsburgh Alliance for People Empowered Reporting, because we want to form a news outlet that is worker run and worker led, and that really understands people better than the Block family or Stuart Bainum or Jeff Bezos ever could. Um, what we want to do is to form a news co-op where we have journalists and community members come together and form an outlet that really serves the needs of the people of Pittsburgh and the region. And, we are deep in business development doing that. I think, one of it's hard to say there's a silver lining in all of this, but, one of the silver linings of the Blocks announcing that they were gonna close the paper back in January is that we started way back then,
Yeah.
almost 6 months ago now, 5 months ago, uh, to form ideas about what an alternative to a Block-owned Post-Gazette could look like. And so we are, 5 months ahead of schedule now in business development and coming up with ideas. We've done a lot of research. There's still a bit of work to do, but we feel pretty strongly like within the next few months, we might be able to actually launch a news organization that's, certainly not going to be a one-to-one replica of the Post-Gazette, but it's going to be a start that we're going to be able to build on over a number of years and hopefully eventually create a really strong news organization that is worker-run and worker-led here in Pittsburgh. And so that's kind of for at least us journalists who got laid off, been a uh, uh, something positive that we're able to look toward and continue to work on.
When we look at the future of journalism here in the city and beyond, and thank you for giving us a little synopsis around paper. I've been intrigued and paying attention and happy to be of support. and amplifying that and continuing to have conversations with the guild members around that. But what do you want people to understand about what is going on in this moment around the quality and the level of independence of local news when you have so many experienced union journalists being pushed out of legacy media?
Yeah, well, I've always had a difficult time answering that question because I think it means so many things. I mean, when you lose quality journalists, uh, you know, you lose institutional knowledge. You lose things like, you know, a real feel for the community.
Mhm.
There's journalists who got laid off from the Post-Gazette who had been working at the Post-Gazette since, in some cases, the 1980s, and certainly the early 1990s. Um, so they know the history of Pittsburgh, City Hall, the school board, the politicians, just the history in general, so much better than really anyone else ever could. And it's just, when you lose that, a community loses a part of itself.
Mhm.
It affects the quality of coverage. It affects, I mean, it affects, the, uh, democracy in so many ways because, you know, uh people can find it much easier to, maybe distort the truth and, uh, say things that, aren't actually, happening, and get away with it. And I'm not accusing anyone, politician or anyone of doing that. But when you have that really strong knowledge of how things work,
Yeah.
uh, you just can't replace that, that's just not something you learn overnight.
Right. No, that is so true. And I think it's so important that we support the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh in this moment and also the new Endeavor paper in whatever iteration or form that ends up taking. I know a lot of people are just interested in what you're doing and how you're managing to power through yet another hurdle. And I give you and the guild members so much credit for your perseverance and your courage and your willingness to stand and fight. I just respect and admire all of you so much. If people want to learn more about paper and how they can be a part of it or at some point, donate to it, where can they go?
Absolutely. So what folks should do is look at ourpapernow.org, and you will find all kinds of information about the work we've done so far. We have a town hall coming up this coming Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. at the United Presbyterian Church in Homestead. Please, anyone who's listening is invited to come out and talk to us there. That town hall is going to be very interactive. We want to hear from the community about what you want to see in a news outlet. And uh, gather as many ideas as we can. We think the community voices are really the key to making this a success. So again, ourpapernow.org, and uh, hopefully we'll have some really good news to share on the front of actually getting a news outlet up and running. Sometime in the next few months. I think the dream is becoming closer to reality. And I just want to thank you for saying, also what you did about our perseverance. I mean, I'm a Pittsburgher born and raised, and that's just what we do in this city. We fight. We're going to continue fighting. I'm not going anywhere. And you know, uh, it's really unfortunate what's happened here, but uh, we have done the impossible before, and I truly believe that we can do it again.
And I believe you, and I stand in solidarity with you always, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Facts Over Fear. If you came late to listening in, don't worry, everybody. I'm going to be posting this soon after, and you can also check it out on YouTube in the coming days as well. Andrew, thank you. And to everyone listening, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Bye, everybody.